Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Marvel's Defenders. So, really, for a lot of people that don't know how exactly all of this is tied into the other shows, because they could have possibly gone on and watched every single bit of every single one of these shows, and then realized, oh, there's a Defenders thing? Oh, what is this about? And then they are to go on and realize, oh, this is to be tied to a number of things. Really, after and here's the funny thing about Netflix's Defenders. We of course have this being tied to a number of shows. We end up having this show tied to 2 seasons of Daredevil. We have, of course, the first season for every other one of these characters, both Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Jessica Jones, tying into all of their first seasons. Now, of course, we are to have a villain that is to be mostly tied into Daredevil's world, but also technically Iron Fist, because heaven forbid you have a huge, diversity of villain here. We just have kind of one villain that covers all, even if they aren't really familiar with the hand all that well, because we have to go on and tell this story about this thing called Black Sky. So we go on in this story and have a honestly very random villainous character in this story that, of course, is to be Alexandra Reed, who is to go on and be diagnosed that all of her organs are failing and she is going to possibly die soon, so she might as well just take the world with it. We, of course, have in this episode, we have, Madame Gao, who, of course, to be tied from the Daredevil show, onto this. But yeah, so there is some tying for some characters. So if you feel like you're not quite caught up on all of this stuff, go ahead and check it out, because without a doubt, these characters, every single show is to really be pretty interesting. I've seen both seasons of Luke Cage and Iron Fist. I've seen all 3 seasons of Daredevil, and the 3rd season of Daredevil does tie into this show, so people might have eventually at some point gotten confused when they go from season 2 of Daredevil to season 3, because it kind of takes a big massive jump because it's covering from the Defender show. And I think Jessica Jones season 3 is technically, it's barely tied to this Defender show, because really we just have Jessica Jones that just, she's Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones, for me, out of all of these characters, I probably had watched her show, in all honesty, the least. I can kind of tell you what happens to a lot of these characters, or I'm familiar with who most of them are, but, really for me, I didn't go out of my way to really watch Jessica Jones. It was just a thing that just consistently seemed disinteresting to me. And also, I just didn't really like the girl who was Jessica Jones, because she was just a character that is to, of course, be very, in your face about things and very rude, in all honesty. But that's the character, not the actor or whatever. It's just the role that she was set to play. So, going into this show, I like all these characters tied together. We do have a lot of fun here with these characters, especially Jessica Jones insulting the rest of these characters. We do, of course, have Jessica Jones, who is tied to Luke Cage, so there's kind of familiar territory there. And it seems that at some point Luke Cage will join the Jessica Jones show at some point, and so on and so forth. But pretty much after this show, we continue to have certain characters that do tie themselves onto certain shows. Like Iron Fist eventually shows up in the Luke Cage show at some point after this. We have kind of certain characters that do eventually go and mix it up a little bit. But anyways, so going on into the show, what is this one about? Well, in this episode, it seems that we have these people that are not to all meet up together in one episode. It is to take us some time to get all these guys together in one big massive thing of a team to, of course, go against the Hand in this episode. So, One thing that I think that I want to get to when eventually we get into spoilers, I think, is to go and attack the Luke Cage story first. Just because I think for him, like, I'll probably forget a lot of stuff that is to be tied with his story compared to everyone else. 'Cause it seems like everyone else has a, like, easy story, and, like, Iron Fist probably has the easiest story, so he'll probably be said last what all is going on with him because he's the easiest. In all honesty, there's very few things going on with him, with the exclusion of me not exactly knowing who exactly was the person that uh, Colleen and Danny were, of course, to find in the very beginning of this episode, leading them to go off to New York in this one. Didn't know who that guy was, but I know who the attacker was, so that's all that really matters, I guess. So, it is what it is. So, we go on in this episode, and I enjoy this show. Some people may not. Some people may not like this show. Some people may find it too all over the place or whatever. I find the show fun. There is to, of course, be like Stick coming into the show and kind of helping these guys team up and kind of insulting them on their way to this whole team up of things. So that'll be a fun thing when we get through that. So, with that said, I think that's all that I want to go out of my way to say about this first episode. Definitely enjoy most of these Netflix series, with the exclusion of me just like I think depending on how popular any of these shows possibly still are, I might just by and large just go and check them out. Simply because I like all these shows, especially all the first seasons. Like I really enjoyed the first season of Iron Fist, and some people hate Iron Fist for whatever reason. Like I could say that the second season wasn't all that great, but like I liked the first. Um, but yeah, so let's go into this. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go out of our way to say that it's about that time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to do spoil this show, this episode of The Defenders. So we of course have Luke Cage because we'll cover him first, and then we'll kind of go through all the other characters and see how their stories went. Really, for Alexandra Reed, I can probably cover her also because really, like most of what I just said in the prepping of this is kind of what happens mostly with this character because we have very few story for her in the show. Eventually, she's just become this villain that is to be tied to Madame Gao, and they end up going on and having some interesting dialogue towards the second half of this episode. So, yeah, let's cover the Alexandra Reed stuff because that's quick and that's easy. So, really, Alexandra Reed is to go to this hospital and get this gowned on, and we end up having her getting to this hospital gown just to be told that her organs are failing and that she's going to die soon. And none of the progress that she has made has changed from the last time she had gone to the doctor. So we go on here and we have Alexandra Reed going and talking to Madame Gao towards the tail end of this show, where they're exchanging this dialogue where Alexandra Reed is going on and talking about how Dutch settlers had gone on and bought Manhattan for about $24. If anything, they'd possibly overpaid. And so we really just have like not much of exchange kind of going on here, just two people kind of re-getting back together here, and Alexandra Reed is to kind of give Madame Gao this bird feed because I guess the birds are really hungry. So it's like, hey, you finish that. You finish feeding these birds, and I'll go and I'll walk away. Very little of business is to be exchanged here, but towards the very end of the episode, we have Alexandra Reed, who of course is to meet up with Black Sky and tell her it's just a city, and that she'll go on and eventually be the villain of this story, and Alexandra is going to be at her side at all times, just kind of guiding her to eventually be the villain that she needs her to be. But also, like, trying to almost be her surrogate mother weirdly through the show for some odd reason. So, Alexandra Reed is to Black Sky. So, and I know who Black Sky is. I'm just like saying it because this person technically is Black Sky now. So, so now to cover the Luke Cage stuff, like I was saying that I was, but like there was so little to do with Alexander Rita's. Like, how about we just knock that out of the park quickly? So, Luke Cage, of course, is to be getting out of prison. Of course, I guess possibly on good behavior because of his unlawful escape from Seagate prison from season 1. He had gone into prison, of course, to finish up his sentence because Luke Cage, of course, was on the run and just kind of hiding out with Pops, kind of being this barber and kind of going and doing some kind of side jobs and getting paid. At some point, being a bartender at some bar somewhere, probably Cottonmouths, from what I remember. Anyways, pushing on. So, Luke Cage is getting out of prison from Seagate, and we go on, and of course, we have Luke Cage who re-meets back up with Foggy Nelson. Because I guess Foggy Nelson was going on and trying to defend Luke Cage. So we have an exchange here going on and having, of course, Foggy mentioning that both Luke and him are to have had phone exchanges where Foggy still doesn't know if this guy's real name is, or that this guy's name is to actually be Mr. Lucas or Mr. Cage. We have, of course, Foggy mentioning that they had talked, and so Luke is just saying, like, well, you talked a lot. I just, like, because, of course, Foggy is to talk a lot more than usually the hero character. Usually, Foggy talks a lot more than Murdoch a lot. Usually, Luke is also to be a silent character, so I'm assuming if there was ever a time where Iron Fist and Luke were to team up together, of course, Danny would be having most of the talking for these characters. So I'm still hoping for that Heroes for Hire show. Maybe one day when we eventually have it where like Luke Cage can come back and kind of play in the possible MCU sandbox. Maybe we'll have that Heroes for Hire show, which that would be pretty cool. But I'm kind of curious if they're going to recast Danny Rand. But I wouldn't mind if they just kept the same Danny Rand. I don't think it was his fault for a unsuccessful show. It was the writer's fault. Anyways, so we go on and we have Foggy, who of course to tell Luke that he now works for Hogarth, Cho, and Benowitz, who of course is to be the new people that he's working for because he's no longer working for Nelson Murdoch because that got dissolved because of differences between the two of them. The difference really being that Matt was to go on and eventually like tell Foggy his secret that he was Daredevil, and Foggy was to go on and want to separate himself away from Murdoch to, I think at some point, really just want money at that point, really just to realize that he was to possibly go and get himself a girlfriend that was to keep poking at him to work with them at her law firm and that they actually pay. So that's where Foggy ended up going, so that way he can actually get paid money and still do a job that is to be similar to what Murdoch does. So we go on here and we, of course, have Luke Cage, who is to break out of his own cuffs and to give it to these guys because it's taking forever for them to unlock him from these cuffs. So Luke gets out of this prison, and we, of course, have Luke, who is asking for Claire when he is to leave, and Foggy's like, well, only lawyers past this point, and he's like, oh, okay. So we go on, we of course have Luke here that is, of course, going on to make it back into Harlem, go on and find where Claire is, and just bang it out, because that's usually what Luke goes on and does. So we consistently have every single one of these characters like asking, it's like, well, hey, like, what do you want to do now? Like, what do you think that you're, like, now that you're out of prison, and like, what are you going to do now? Every single one of these characters, it's like, well, hey, like, you should be a hero now. You should eventually be who you're meant to be. And that's kind of what every single bit of dialogue is to go on here. But between Luke and Claire, the real exchange here is that Luke, of course, is going on and talking to Claire, and Claire evidently had wrote him a bunch of letters, and she's like, yeah, it's been such a long time since I've actually wrote letters. And he's like, well, yeah, what about that poem that you wrote me? And she's like, and he's like, well, yeah, you kind of plagiarized that poem, and you kind of ripped off some other kind of poet. And she's like, oh, come on. So after the time of which that they've kind of spent together, all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. All of a sudden we are to, of course, have Misty Knight arrive, and I'm like, well, yeah, like, when really thinking of it, like the Luke Cage pilot, we have Misty Knight, who is to meet up with Luke Cage, and they ended up having their night together. Uh, we now have it to where, of course, like, you can't have a Luke Cage episode or a Luke Cage thing without Misty Knight being somewhere mixed in there. So we, of course, have both Luke Cage and Misty Knight going off to walk the streets, where we're kind of seeing where Luke and Misty's head is at, where it seems that Misty is to go on and have a special task force being put together, and it seems like she's not just working in Harlem anymore, even though it's still home to her. Because, of course, Misty is to go on and get, like, credit for taking down Diamondback, technically, even though the real credit is to go to Luke. But Luke is saying, it's like, no, we took down Diamondback. So we go on and we, of course, have here that Misty is to go on and take Luke to this car that, of course, had someone die within it. And so we, of course, get the official and unofficial story, where, of course, there is to be some guy, I think his name is Sean, who, of course, was killed in this car. And supposedly he was to be some kind of carrier or courier of sorts. And it seems like the brother, who is to be forcibly off to maybe end up being a courier like his brother, has some tie with Candace Miller, who is a waitress for Cottonmouth, and had gone on to use Maria Dillard to frame Luke Cage for the murder of Cottonmouth. So kind of tying to the show and whatever. So we now go on and have Luke Cage, who's like, well, like, what do you kind of expect me to do out of all this? And because Luke Cage wants to get involved with Misty Knight's cases, he's like, well, hey, like, maybe you're going to need some guy that's not exactly having a badge to help you out in the near future. And Misty Knight's like, yeah, we'll probably get to that. But so But really, what Misty Knight is really wanting Luke to do here is to go on and instead of going in there like Luke Cage, the bulletproof guy, she wants him to kind of go in there and be like Pops, wanting to try and sway this youth to go onto a much more forward path or a much more righteous path or so on and so forth. So eventually Luke is to go on to make into this house where Luke is to find a guy named Cole. And so he starts talking to him, mentioning that this kid is gonna have the only way out for him is if Luke Cage can make him bulletproof too. That at some point he's going to be forced to do jobs that he doesn't want to do because like he is to just there's nowhere for him to go. And there's so much history tying into this guy that basically like yeah he's already just like hooked into doing something bad and there's no way to turn this guy around now. And that we of course have this Cole who's saying it's like well yeah uh like there's no way that a hero like you can save me. And Luke, of course, like every one of these guys, are kind of refusing to call themselves a hero, and he's like, "Well, that's your word, not mine. I'm not that guy. I'm just a good Samaritan and whatever." So Luke goes off, realizing that there's nothing he can do here, and so he goes off to eventually, I'm assuming, go back to Claire and just start banging away. What else is he gonna do? Like, come on, he's been in prison for a while now. So, since we've covered most of Luke's story, I think we can go on to cover, of course, uh, let's cover Matt's story because I think he's like the second hardest one to cover here. So, we of course have Matt, who, of course, is going on and dealing with this case. And so this case is, of course, uh, for a handicapped kid named Aaron James. And so it seems that we have Matt practicing what he's going to say, like in this trial. And so he is to be kind of printing off this, this braille thing for him to just kind of look at some point. So Murdoch goes on and is to, of course, talk to this one man, mentioning about this motor in this station that, of course, was to be a cheap product that was to go on and eventually realize that it should at some point had been recalled because it was to put people in danger. Put people in danger like Aaron James, forcing him to now be handicapped for the rest of his life. So we go on and we, of course, have this case that, fortunate for Murdoch, he is to win here. And I know that was kind of quickly just swept under the rug. But like really there's some technical stuff that I didn't want to heavily go into, and really what is the real legitimate point of going in there and going into the thorough deep down stuff of it. I think I got the gist. So we go on and we have Murdoch and Aaron, who are outside the court, finding out that they are to receive $11 million. So we now have Aaron, who is just kind of talking to Murdoch here. And so Murdoch is telling Aaron, it's like, well, hey, like, if anything, someday you might be able to walk again. But, like, and Aaron is like, well, yeah, I really just want to get my life back. And And Murdoch is just like, well, yeah, like it's just like you just taking the time to have to deal with this, like you taking the time to eventually like get past this moment and don't let anybody take it away from you, kind of thing. So we have Aaron going on and talking to a bunch of reporters, and so Murdoch all of a sudden is to bump into Miss Page, who, of course, we know her as technically when Murdoch and Nelson were together. A lot of times, Miss Page was both of their assistants. She, of course, wasn't making any money off of assisting them, but she did that anyways. In the second season, it seems that Miss Page is to, well, even in the first season, we eventually switched to have Miss Page eventually become a reporter so she can start making money. Working, I think, with Ben Urich and going on to eventually be wrapped into the Punisher, and that's why eventually you see Miss Page tied into, of course, the first season of Punisher for one episode, and then she leaves. In the third season, Miss Page eventually will be a much more prominent character, so much so that I'm like, man, like she is so focused on this third season. Like that's the one thing that I just kind of felt like, ugh, about this show was all of a sudden like we had such a focus on Karen Page that I was like, man, where is Daredevil in this show? I thought this was a Murdoch thing. Um, but no, like Karen was used so heavily in the third season, and it was like, man, wow. Uh, no offense, like it had nothing to do with this being like a female character or whatever. Like I was just like, isn't this Daredevil? Isn't this show called Daredevil? That's what I'd have to question a lot. Um, but anyways, so like, was there a spinoff that I wasn't realizing here going on? What the? So so we have Miss Page and Murdoch going on and having some coffee together, and not the Luke Cage kind of coffee, because we immediately have Claire asking Luke like, "Hey, you want some coffee?" So both of them, of course, are having exchanges, and we, of course, have Murdoch talking about the scandal that Page had reported on, and we, of course, ask, like, have this exchange about, because Page, of course, is to know Matt Murdock's secret, because, of course, like, the second season is to eventually be that reveal, because eventually both Murdoch and Page are to fall in love with one another, and so really it gets to the point of them like eventually Murdoch eventually has to divulge this secret to Page. So but we also have at some point the reflection on Elektra, and that it seems that Murdoch is kind of between two things here, either going and being with Page or going on and living the free life being with Elektra, where of course Elektra is this rich girl who can do whatever she wants. So but anyways, so eventually Page, of course, is to ask Murdoch whether or not he misses being the costume devil, and Murdoch is just like, well, no. Like, if anything, I feel like that's a chapter in a story that is to be finished, and I feel like I can just do more being Matt Murdock. To where it's kind of funny because eventually we are to think the opposite for a lot of times, where Matt Murdock doesn't need to be Matt Murdock, he needs to be more Daredevil. So we have, of course, like Paige, who's like, well, yeah, I think you need to be like Matt Murdock now. I think it makes a lot more sense. But then all of a sudden, we eventually have Murdock, who goes on to confessional, talking to some priest and mentioning that his confession that is that he lied, is that he does kind of he's having a fight with his soul to really actually want to go back and be Daredevil, because really we have this kind of back and forth about it and whether Daredevil should go on and be back with Elektra because uh, it could possibly make him a lot happier to just kind of have that much more freedom to be who he wants to be. Where I think when he goes on and is with Paige, that freedom is all of a sudden taken. So we go on here and we have Murdoch who is to go and have him do some soul searching, so to speak. And so eventually Murdoch is to go on to make it to his home, and all of a sudden there seems to be some cracks going on in the city for whatever goofy odd like reason because of explosives and so on and so forth. And so, which will eventually be more understood later on in the show, we all of a sudden are to have Daredevil realize that there is a number of people all in trouble and that he has to figure out now what he who he really needs to be right now. And he can just stay at home and be Matt Murdock, or he can go and suit up and save people and be the hero that he needs to be. So now let's go on and cover Jessica Jones because she's another kind of difficult case here, so to speak. Speaking of case. So Jessica, of course, is to wake up at some bar somewhere because, of course, that's where we kind of know her to really be. At one point, I think she ends up even like banging a guy in a bathroom stall in some episode somewhere. Um, Probably at a bar, probably somewhere also, because Jessica is just like that kind of gal, and that's the thing that I can like about her. But also, there is some funny things about Jessica. Like, I don't want to seem like I just don't like Jessica. Like, there's stuff that I can like about her. I just don't know if like I can enjoy 3 seasons worth of this kind of character because of the kind of uh, very like the way that she kind of approaches things. Uh, I don't know. Well, like I think I might go on to a Jessica Jones show. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm still. It'll depend on how well this goes. It'll depend on how well or interested anybody is with any of this stuff. If no one's interested, then that easily works for me. I could just go and finish this show up and then just eventually go on and do other things. In all honesty, so Jessica Jones, of course, is to get out of this bar to go and meet with Trish Walker, who, of course, from what I remember her being on the show, like, I think she is to be a radio personality or a podcaster. Never really quite understood exactly what that narrowed down for me to understand who this person is. Uh, and so eventually I know that she goes on to eventually have a drug addiction, and she eventually winds up, of course, with Malcolm at some point, who, of course, is to be Jessica's drug informant, and so on and so forth. So let's get into this. So Jessica's going on and talking to Trish Walker, and again we have this kind of still kind of thought process of where Jessica should really be at this point and who she should really be. And we have Trish kind of tempted to say the word hero, and Jessica is like, "Do not say the H word." Like, no, no, like that's the furthest thing of what I want to do right now, because Jessica wants to just continue to do her cases, and that's all she really cares about. She doesn't want anything beyond that. But eventually, it seems that one of her cases is going to force her to become the person that she does not want to be. Like any of these characters don't want to really be. They just want to do their own thing, but they're going to eventually be forced to not just be able to just do their own thing at some point. So let's push on. So Jessica, of course, is to make it to her place to all of a sudden have this mother and daughter who, of course, are both uh, Michelle Raymond and Lexi Raymond, who, of course, have a husband named John Raymond, who is to be this squeaky clean guy that is to have gone missing. And so we have Jessica Jones immediately assuming that this John Raymond guy is to go off and have some affair, and like, why is she kind of bothering her with all this? And so Michelle is just like, well, is it going to come down to money? Like, I can easily help you with this whole scenario and go on and like pay you if that's what it takes. Uh, One thing that I forgot about the Luke Cage story, which I'll get to in a second here, because I completely forgot about how Luke Cage's story is to fiddle off an end. So we'll come back to that. So we all of a sudden are to have Jessica Jones that is to make it into her office to all of a sudden get this encrypted call from Darth Vader. No, it's John Raymond. So we of course have this encrypted caller who's telling, of course, Jessica Jones to not look into the John Raymond case. Weirdly, like right after that this whole meeting had gone on to be. So all of a sudden, Jessica Jones is decided to look into this John Raymond case, and all of a sudden, Malcolm is to come in and is to uh, go on and use his kind of his skills of him kind of knowing some guys, being informed on some things to eventually help Jessica figure things out. Having her call, I guess, an operator or something, and desperately wanting to get some blocked call because she's saying that it's her her grandpa that is with ill health, and so she desperately needs this phone call, and it kind of works out. So it seems that Jessica is to realize that this is coming from some payphone somewhere. Like, who uses payphones anymore? So me too. I ask that question every single day of my life. Who uses payphones anymore? Probably a number of people. There was a lot of times where, when I was in high school, there were certain times where I would call collect, just to leave a message on somebody's thing saying like, "Hey, like I'm done now. Like, can you come and pick me up?" kind of thing, and that worked a lot, luckily. So until eventually I got a phone. A flip phone. That was my very first phone because I liked flip phones for some odd reason. It seemed like that was the in thing at that time. Now we of course have these things where we have like all this kind of stuff that we have to kind of click and trick and whatever. So moving on. So Jessica Jones is to find out exactly where John Raymond is to, of course, be kind of holding his hat, because Jessica Jones is to look around via uh, the neighborhood places to go on and find this one apartment complex that is to seemingly have John Raymond uh, living here. So we go on and we, of course, have Jessica Jones go through this one room by using her power, of course, to just easily take this door out. So we go on and we find that John Raymond is not in this apartment complex because Jessica is immediately assuming that he's banging away with some lady of the night, and he is having some midlife crisis, something like that. But all of a sudden, it seems like there's a lot more than just a midlife crisis going on here, as Jessica is to find out that there is a whole entire room rigged, or not rigged, but with a ton of construction explosives. Like, so much so to where Jessica is to open up this box and say, holy as she is to go on and I'm assuming like leaving this freaking place because there's bombs in these boxes. So she's like, F this. So really, that's the tail end of Jessica's story here. for her to realize that there's explosives in this guy's room. So back to the Luke Cage story, we of course have Dolores that is going on and lighting a candle visual of this car that has numerous pictures of Candace and Sean, and all of a sudden we have a because of this explosion that is kind of course, like shaking the ground as we know it. All of a sudden, there is to be a light, a traffic light that falls over, and Luke Cage has to grab onto it and have it being shaking as it seems like the ground is to, of course, be trembling with fear as what is going to happen next. So now that I've covered technically all of that, and hopefully I've covered all of that, now let's go on and what ends up happening to, of course, Iron Fist here. And immediately I'm going to possibly want to pause here for a second because I want to figure out. Oh, it doesn't matter. So it's all good. So we of course end up having we have Iron Fist going on and uh, fighting Black Sky because they are trying to save some informant guy named Shaft, who of course is getting the shaft because he's soon going to get killed. We, of course, have Iron Fist going and trying to fight Black Sky, but he, of course, ends up getting stabbed in the chest. Uh, and so we, of course, have Colleen go on and trying to make it to Danny and realizing that Black Sky is to be gone and Shaft is to be going to die here. And so Shaft is to go on and inform both Colleen and Danny that the fight that they're taking here in Colombia, I think it's Colombia. I could be wrong about that. The fight that they're taking here in Colombia is not actually where the fight is supposed to be. The real fight is actually in New York City. And so both Colleen and Danny are to go on to another plane. You would think with Danny, like in the way of which that he is to lose his parents in his story, you would think that Danny wouldn't have gone on to fly any plane ever. But I guess like Danny is just risking his life at any point in time. So Danny, of course, is to go on and have a dream here, which we don't realize at first is a dream. But Danny, of course, is to go on and seemingly in this dream kind of be washing his chest wound and is to all of a sudden go on and find a bunch of his Kung Lun people that he was supposedly to save had all died. Because at the very end of Iron Fist, I think the first season, we have Danny finding out that everyone in Kunlun had all been killed, and that was the one place that the Iron Fist was supposed to defend. And so Danny now freaking having nightmares about the place that he was sworn to defend is now having all these people who are to be dead, and his own mirror itself is telling him this is your fault that you would kill all these people that you were sworn to defend and whatever because you went off to New York City. You went off to get back who you were as Danny Rand and get back to the people that really didn't like him all that much. There's a bunch of people that just loathed and hated him and just... But he just desperately wanted to just be convinced that he could still be this Danny Rand, and they had to go out of their way to find some scrape of evidence to prove that he was Danny Rand. It got down to like some pot that he had made when he was very young, and there was a smudge of a fingerprint and whatever, and that got to be the evidence, making it so that Danny Rand is actually to finally be a living, breathing person. So that way they can go on and do paperwork on him because Danny had nothing, so on and so forth. So Danny goes on and, of course, is to wake up from his nightmare. And Colleen was mentioning that Danny was screaming again. I'm like, well, really, when looking at it, Danny has a number of things to be having terrible nightmares about, like his parents being dead, Kung Lun is to all be killed, and really, he's like this guy has probably had some severe post traumatic stress, if anything. But I remember like the very first season of Iron Fist reminding me a lot of like Arrow for some odd reason, and I really enjoyed it. But some people may not feel that way. So we go on here, and of course we have Danny, who's wanting to go on and talk to the pilot, and not wanting to talk to Colleen about what is really going on with him. So we eventually have it where Danny is to land onto New York after he is to take a helicopter to this place. So we go on, and we of course have Danny who's asking Colleen, it's like, well, what do you think that New York City is going to be to you? And Colleen is like, I just want it to be home. So we also have them going on and talking about the things that like the hand had hid from them, and that Colleen was kind of left realizing that there's a lot of stuff that even when she was working with the hand, like they didn't tell her. I guess they didn't want her to know. But anyways, so really there's very few things that like both Danny and Colleen really do, and they come towards the end of this show with us just really just seeing the city kind of crumbling down, and both now Danny and Colleen are going to have to jump into action here because if anything they have very little to really do here for this episode. So with that said, that's really what kind of breaks down in all this first episode. If anything that I probably had missed or forgotten about, because I'm sure there's a number of things, I did this a different way than probably the show was to be broken down to be, because honestly it is what it is. We'll kind of see if people or to be interested in Defenders or any number of these Netflix shows, and then I will go out of my way to say that I've seen them because most of them I had besides Jessica Jones, and we'll see which one is popular. We'll see which one is really interested people. If it's Defenders, it's Defenders. If something else, then it's something else. So we'll go on and see where that lies, because I'm otherwise going to go on to check to eventually see which one of these, because that's the whole point of me doing Defenders, to like instead of just go on and just put like one thing out there, one thing out there, one thing out there, why not just do this all in one fell swoop to make it easy? So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here so I can get out of my way to go on to do other things for today. So goodbye everybody. Bye everybody. Depending on how short these episodes will be, there might be some times where I might combine two episodes, but I think it's a lot easier for me to just do these like one-off episodes, considering like I don't know exactly what I'm going to be getting into for every other day. But if it seems that this show is to interest people, I might go into other episodes. If it seems like there's donut holes worth of zero interest, then that'll work out for me because I can figure out what else is interesting to people. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.